So, I mean, the first thing to say, Patagonia is huge. It's roughly 1 million square kilometers.
Oh.
And it's essentially, it spans the southern halves of Argentina and Chile. It's a region that goes across the borders. And essentially, it's one of the world's last surviving wildernesses. And it has some of those dramatic landscapes on Earth. Mountains, the Andes, of course, huge swathes of steppe, glaciers. It has one of the biggest ice fields in the world outside of the poles. There are beautiful lakes, there are temperate rainforests, there are fjords, there are towns and cities, but they're dotted around. It's very sparsely populated. I mean, it's an absolutely breathtaking place. It's got a fascinating history, and it's great for adventure sports and so on. And it's one of those places in the world that just the name of it is incredibly evocative, and it lives up to the hype.
Hello and welcome to episode 155 with Shafik Meghji. Shafik is a returning guest on the podcast, a rare occurrence, and today we're deep diving Patagonia, mainly from the Argentinian side, whilst we do touch the Chilean side also. We also talk about Cordoba in Argentina, the second city, and since the recording, Shafik has been there on assignment for his work, and this is a place I do not know too much about, and now I do, because I've done the edit, and I'm excited to release the episode for you. Shafik is a great guest, always welcome back on. I think there'll be a hat trick of episodes, a first for the podcast. He's travelled to so many countries. He spent a decade or even 2 decades in South America. So knowledgeable, lots of tips and tricks, and an awesome speaker and an awesome guy. One of the best travel writers in the UK. Be sure to listen, take your notes, and I'll see you next time. Hello and welcome to this week's episode where I'm joined by Shafik Meghji, an award-winning journalist, travel writer, author, editor, broadcaster and photographer, and he is back on for round 2, which is quite rare for the podcast. And today we're going to talk about Patagonia and South America, maybe a bit of Argentina, other parts as well, and see what he's up to in the coming year. Shafik, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. Delighted to be back and talking to you again.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you back on. I think last time we did a deep dive in Bolivia and we thought Patagonia had to be next because you've been there extensively. I'm going to ask the same question again. Where are you right now?
Well, yeah, just like the last time, I'm somewhat less exotic than the place that we're going to be talking about. I'm in my home in South London, which is kind of classic April day. So we've had sunshine and showers, and but it's not too bad at the moment.
Yeah, this is quite rare for me as well. I've not really done a sort of like a second interview in the same setting. You've got the same background. I've probably got the same background. It's a bit new for me as well, so bear with me. We'll have a little catch up before we get on to Patagonia. So we spoke probably end of last year, maybe October time. What have you been up to since then?
Yeah, it's been, I mean, the time since then has flown by. It's been busy from a work point of view, lots of writing. But I've had a couple of good trips. I've been to Vienna. I was speaking at a travel event there, which was really, really good fun. And then, and more recently, I was in Georgia for the first time in February, where I was doing a travel writing masterclass at an event called Traverse in Tbilisi. So, yeah, that was really, really good fun. Tbilisi is a really interesting city. And then after that, had a bit of a chance to explore some of the rest of the country, went up to the Svaneti region, which is the mountainous Caucasus, which was absolutely spectacular. Had the misfortune of traveling during one of the worst storms in years. So got caught in a blizzard, had rather too close for comfort encounters with avalanches, but the experience overall was wonderful. Yeah, people were very hospitable. It was a fascinating region. But I think the next time I'll go there will be in the spring rather than in the end of the war.
Yes, that makes sense. People love Georgia, though, don't they? When you hear people write or talk about it, I can't find anyone who said that they don't like it. So it must be a good country to go to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's somewhere that I'd heard a lot about from like my colleagues and friends who'd been there. Yeah, so I was eager to get out there. I mean, I was only out there for just over a week, but yeah, very positive impressions, and it definitely fired my imagination and desire to go and explore a little bit more. It's a really, really interesting place.
And the surrounding countries as well, quite interesting, aren't they? I know there's a bit of tension there with Armenia and Azerbaijan, but that whole area, I think a lot of people do club them together because it's quite magical, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of my colleagues on this trip did. Sadly, I had to make it back, but yeah, definitely. I mean, the whole of the kind of the South Caucasus region is fascinating, and I think underexplored as well from a British perspective. So I'm sure we'll be seeing more of it in the years to come.
I imagine so. Yeah. On my notes, I've got you up for an award coming soon.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it feels like I've pressed ganged you into mentioning that, but
No, no.
yeah, no, yeah, no. Yeah, I'm up for a Trav Media Award, and I'm up for some Inspire Global Media Awards. So it's always lovely to be shortlisted for these kind of. But and actually, and it's something else I've just been doing is I've been a judge
Mm,
on the Edward Stanford Travel Book of the Year 2024, which just the winner recently announced a wonderful book by Gaith Abdul Ahad called A Stranger in Your Own City.
sounds
So
great.
yeah, so kind of a few awards, but it was nice it was very nice to be on the judging panel um, for this one, and I read some brilliant books, including the winners.
Yeah, I do love a book recommendation. I'll give that a go. Oh, yeah, I just see it on social media. Yeah, yeah, I just saw you were yeah doing the awards. I think they come in April, aren't they? I think, and then
Yeah.
obviously you're doing the book thing as well. So yeah, that seems like you keep busy with that. When you do those book review award for Stanford, do you have to like read a set amount of books in a set amount of time?
Yeah, essentially there were five of us on the judging panel for this category, and we were
Mm,
given a short list of six books, but there were many more than that were submitted for the awards, and then the wonderful Stanford's staff, who are some of the best read, I think, in the industry, go through them, and they picked out their six favorites, and then those books came to us. So it's kind of a mixture of writers and authors and travel writing enthusiasts, and then we read them all in great detail and had really good positive interesting discussion about them, and then we're left with the difficult task of
oh,
picking a winner from six excellent titles.
I guess they all win though, right? If you make a short list of six amongst, I imagine, hundreds of books, I think, or hundreds of books, should I say, I think you've done pretty well. Um, that's a good effort,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, awards to some extent are always a little bit arbitrary as well.
Arbin.
And I know it's a cliche, and you know, it probably doesn't make people on the shortlist who didn't win feel any better. But really, any of the six books on the shortlist would have been worthy winners. But yeah, in the end, we went for A Stranger in Your Own City, which I'd highly recommend to listeners.
Awesome. Okay, that's great. We're going to talk Patagonia. Let's go straight there, and maybe tell listeners about the region of where it is and maybe what it's known for. Do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing to say, Patagonia is huge. It's roughly 1 million square kilometers,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it spans the southern halves of Argentina and Chile. It's a region that goes across the borders, and essentially it's one of the world's last surviving wildernesses, and it has some of those dramatic landscapes on Earth. Mountains, the Andes, of course, huge swathes of steppe, glaciers. It has one of the biggest ice fields in the world outside of the poles. There are beautiful lakes, there are temperate rainforests, there are fjords, there are towns and cities, but they're dotted around, and it's very sparsely populated. I mean, it's an absolutely breathtaking place. It's got a fascinating history, and it's great for adventure sports and so on. And it's one of those places in the world that just the name of it is incredibly evocative, and it lives up to the hype.
So for tourists going, I'm going to kick off with like the time of year. Obviously, we're going to have to flip our seasons over here based in Northern Hemisphere to go Southern Hemisphere. What are some of the best months to go and travel to?
Yeah, I mean, you can visit Patagonia throughout the year, as you might expect. The winter gets can get really cold. Although the cliched expression that they use in Patagonia is that whenever you go, you can expect four seasons in a day, and that's definitely been my experience. There, it's incredibly windy throughout the year. It's often a bit windier in the summer, for example. But yeah, you can. Yeah, if you go in the winter, you can expect snow and ice and stuff. But it's great for winter sports. There's great places to ski and snowboard. If you go in the summer, if you're interested in trekking and those kind of things and some of the wildlife experiences, that's the time to go. My recommendation on times to go, the sweet spots to go is you could substitute them for almost any place in the world, which is just springtime and autumn, which they just have a good combination of good weather, pretty decent weather, and in the tourist spots, not too many crowds or smaller crowds than the summer peak season, which is kind of in roughly December to February, broadly speaking. So the hot spots get very busy at that point. So if you can visit just before that period or just after that period, yeah, that's a really good time to go.
Is the is over tourism a bit of a problem there? Do you think in the summer months maybe or the peak times? Like, what's the feeling amongst the locals if you've experienced any about is it getting a bit too much or do there need to be some sort of control for the area? Maybe maybe both countries are different. Obviously, it's different countries, but what's your feeling?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked the question. Yeah, I mean, despite being an absolutely huge region and many parts of it get very few, virtually no tourists. The popular spots and Park National Torres del Paine on the Chilean side would be a prime example of this, do suffer from over tourism. If we just take Torres del Paine, for example, which is one of the, if not the most popular tourist
Mm,
destination in Chile, an incredible place to trek, stunning mountains, scenery, really good for wildlife, pumas, for example. But the park itself is undoubtedly suffering from over tourism, particularly the classic routes. So there's the W track, and then there's the O or the circuit track, which are epic multi-day routes. But I was there a couple of years ago for Lonely Planet, and yeah, and you can see even I was visiting just before the peak season, and already you could see
mm,
the impact, not just in the wear and tear on the trails and the surrounding areas, which obviously impacts on kind of the biodiversity of the area, but also in terms of the lodges, the infrastructure, and so on. So for places like that, and there are equivalent places in Argentina, El Calafate, which is the gateway to the Los Glaciares National Park, for example,
mhm.
those places I'd really recommend visiting outside of the tourist season, if you possibly can. And also in Torres del Paine, skipping, avoiding the most famous kind of iconic routes and exploring other areas of the park, perhaps doing different activities. You can go horse riding, you can go kayaking, for example.
Hmm.
And also there's incredible places to visit just outside of the park boundaries, but similarly impressive in terms of landscapes. I mean, I'll give one example of that, which would be an estancia, which is a ranch named Cerro Guido, and they're on the boundary of Torres del Paine, and they offer incredible. They run a really positive puma conservation project, and they do really responsible small group puma spotting trips, responsibly run. They put the puma's welfare first rather than the tourists' interest of getting photos and so on. And that's and projects like that and visiting other areas of the park are how you as a visitor can help to preserve these landscapes, as well as getting out a bit further into Patagonia, because there's lots
Hmm.
and lots to explore, and often getting off the beaten track is actually more rewarding as well.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, I think we all agree with all that. I think people do go to the same areas, but because this place is huge, is it possible to go and stay in somewhere a bit different in the park because it is so big? I think where I'm going with this is the infrastructure there to go and travel there by road, and is there little towns that just aren't on the map that maybe we could explore?
In Torres del Paine, which has incredibly developed infrastructure, you definitely can get away from those
Mm,
main routes. You can do lots of that independently during the summer. In the winter, you need to go with a guide. And there's
mm,
also some very good local tour operators and guest houses and hotels that can help to facilitate these activities. So that's something 100% that you can do easily there. Elsewhere in Patagonia, away from those more tourist areas, you definitely can, visit some of the more remote or isolated areas. It often takes a bit more time. Transport is often sketchy, particularly if you're trying to avoid flying. I mean, really can't emphasize how big the distances are in
yeah,
these areas, particularly if you're coming from somewhere like the UK.
yeah.
It's on a whole other scale. You definitely, but the short answer is you definitely can do it. You just sometimes need to do a bit more forward planning.
Okay. And have you visited? both sides, Argentina and the Chilean side? And if so, what are
Yeah,
the entry points into those sides?
yeah. So I've visited both parts kind of multiple times over the years. I spent most of the experience has been on the Argentine side, but I've spent a lot of time in both, and including in Tierra del Fuego, which is the southernmost tip of South America.
Mm,
It's separated from Patagonia by the Magellan Strait. Some people include it within Patagonia. Some
right.
people include it as a separate region for the
Yeah.
interests of this discussion because it's a fantastic place. I'll include it within it,
Okay.
within our discussions. But yeah, so the key entry points. Let's take Argentina first. Essentially, the biggest tourist areas in Argentine Patagonia are in the northeast, on the northeast Atlantic coast. And there's a town or city called Puerto Madryn, which is the gateway to the Peninsula Valdes Reserve, which is one
Hmm.
of the most important marine reserves in South America. It's an incredible place for spotting, for whale watching, particularly. Southern white whales go to breed there, but also seals and just south of there, penguins, orcas you can
Mm.
often spot there. And it's good for diving and those kind of activities. It is also the gateway to Welsh Patagonia. So there's a small community
Oh,
of partly Welsh speaking, but Welsh descendants who, the community dates back 150 years ago. It's a fascinating history, which we probably don't have enough time to go into here, but it's well worth looking up. But the area is known within Argentina and further afield for its Welsh teas. So people will
wow.
actually you go inland from Puerto Madryn and you go to a village like Gaiman, which has like Welsh street names. You sometimes hear Welsh on the street. There's a fascinating museum there, but it's filled with Welsh tea rooms, which do like a classic, from a British point of view, it'd be like like a high tea.
High tea. Yeah.
Absolutely copious, copious cakes and sandwiches and pastries and that kind of stuff with
Wow.
tea or coffee
Never knew.
so yeah, so that's one of the big areas that you would draw tourists in Argentina. The other part of it is in it's the southwest, so towards the Andes, towards the south. And there's a place called El Calafate and El Chalten, and these towns are the gateway to Park National Los Glaciares. Protects part of the South Patagonian ice field. It's one of the biggest ice fields outside of the poles. And you've almost certainly seen photos and videos of this because they're these giant glaciers, the Moreno Glacier being the most famous. You can watch it from viewing platforms. You can take boat trips around it. If you have the time, I'd highly recommend taking an ice trekking trip, which means
Mm.
strapping on crampons and taking a
Yeah.
guided hike across the surface of it, which is an incredible
Wow.
experience. You can indulge your inner polar explorer should you wish. And then on another side of the park is El Chalten, which is very close to the Chilean border, and that's the trekking capital of Argentina. And it takes you on, there's wonderful self-guided or guided if you want treks into the park, and it's absolutely a beautiful place to go hiking. Again, very popular during the peak season, December to February, so it's well worth visiting outside of it. And then the final part of Argentine Patagonia that's really popular is the Lake District, which is
Oh,
often sometimes it's separated off into its own region, but and Bariloche, which is a chocolate box lakeside town, kind of has an alpine feel. That's the main hub for both domestic and foreign tourism. And again, hiking, relaxing by the lake during the winter, going skiing, snowboarding, that kind of stuff. It's wonderful for cycling as well. So those are the hotspots within Argentine Patagonia. Chilean Patagonia, the landscape's quite, it's quite different. If you look at it on a map, it's much more fragmented. It's slightly more difficult to travel, say, from North Patagonia to South Patagonia. You have to go by water or fly for some of them. Some of the ferry routes are absolutely spectacular. But yeah, in southern Patagonia, the main city there is Punta Arenas, which is on the Strait of Magellan. Really interesting place, and not too far away from there, in Patagonian terms, is the town of Puerto Natales, and that's the gateway to Park National Torres del Paine. So those are the key areas on either side of it, and then South of there, you've got Tierra del Fuego, which is again divided between Argentina
Mm.
and Chile. And in Argentina, you've got Ushuaia, which is on the Beagle Channel, and that's where most Antarctic cruises depart from.
Mm.
It's also stunning setting. It's very near a great national park. It's got an incredibly interesting history. It used to be a penal colony, which you can really get
Oh,
into for
okay.
that. And now it often calls itself the southernmost city on Earth, which is
Yeah.
technically not true because if you continue south across the Beagle Channel, over the border into Chile, you come to technically a city, although it's only got a couple of thousand people, called Puerto Williams. And
Right.
yeah, the Chilean government relatively recently changed the designation of it from a town to a city. And
Yeah.
yeah, and that's an absolutely spectacular place. And yeah, you're barely 1,000 kilometers north of Antarctica at that point.
Wow. I think Ushuaia is definitely known, isn't it, as the hub of Antarctica. The Welsh part, are they speaking Spanish and Welsh? That might be a stupid question. Like they grow up obviously in Argentine and they speak Spanish. That's a given. But they're keeping their Welsh language heritage. Is that what is the idea? And I guess are they actively trying to keep that as well?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. I mean, to give you a very short rundown of the history, I mean, it basically dates back more over 150 years, and about
Yeah.
150 settlers from Wales came over to Patagonia and yeah, founded a small colony there, and they left partly for cultural reasons to protect their culture from kind of English. But yeah, but the language, cultural traditions, cultural festivals such as the Eisteddfod, which still goes on there, are huge parts of the culture. Not everyone speaks Welsh, but a significant proportion of people do. And yeah, it's the culture is definitely is very much alive there. Yeah, and they often speak Welsh and Spanish, but not necessarily English.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Okay. I was going to ask, obviously, to fly into these areas, you probably have to go to the capitals, right? I imagine Buenos Aires and then Santiago. I'm only guessing here, so you can obviously confirm. That'd be
Yeah.
most people's main route into the area. Then I guess from there, what is the best way to get down to the area?
Yeah, so I mean, I always try and advise people to fly as little as possible,
Mm,
from environmental reasons. But it obviously traveling by, or in some cases by boat takes a lot longer. But yeah, essentially the main towns in both Argentine and Chilean Patagonia have airports, so you can
okay.
fly. Sometimes you need to connect from Santiago and Buenos Aires, but you can get to places like Puerto Madryn, to Ushuaia, to Punta Arenas. But you can also go by public transport. You can also you can go by
Us?
bus, by public
Mm,
bus. They're all connected. You know, these journeys are often long, but you can make it, and you can make it all the way by road from Buenos Aires down to Ushuaia, for example, with a small short ferry crossing across the Strait of Magellan.
mm.
So you can get to these places. So you can do it on more of a budget because Patagonia generally is more expensive. Traveling in that region is more expensive than elsewhere in both Argentina and Chile. The Argentine side generally tends to be a bit cheaper because Argentina is a little bit cheaper at the
Yeah.
moment. But a way of keeping costs down is traveling by traveling by a bus. On the Chilean side, if you want to go all the way from Santiago down to Punta Arenas, you do need to get a ferry, but that's an absolutely spectacular journey, really. I mean, and the word ferry doesn't really do it justice because you're going through fields, you're seeing
Oh,
glaciers, you're seeing incredible temperate rainforests.
oh, wow.
Um, but yeah, you obviously need a little bit more time to do it that way.
Yeah, I guess it's time, isn't it? I suppose is the main key here. But South American buses are great. When I was there, just chopping around the bus, compared to Southeast Asia, for example, if people are trying to think of a comparison, much better for like their normal class. I guess in Southeast Asia, you can pay a bit more money and get the luxury class bus. But just the normal buses in Argentina were great and Chile. No problems.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely. And they
consider it.
deserve a shout out because I know sometimes people who haven't visited the area, the continent before might have a different picture of it. As you say, from Southeast Asia, they're often not necessarily up to that standard. Let's take Argentina for example. There's lots of different classes of buses, and the fanciest of equivalent in comfort levels to business class on a plane in terms of fully reclining seats. But almost all of them will have TVs. Almost all of them will have meal services, even hot meal services, including steaks, believe it or not.
Oh
And
wow,
you
not my
often
bad.
get free alcohol, like a glass of wine or
Yeah.
beer or something included in the ticket price. Another little quirky thing is that they often have bingo games
Okay.
on board as well. Some of these journeys can be really long, 12, 24 hours
Yeah.
plus. So they do try and entertain you. And quite often, if you take a few buses, you'll probably have a bingo game at some point. I've never won yet, but it's always been a fun diversion.
Oh wow, yeah. I think my bus experience is just from Iguazu up to Salta and then across north to Chile, right? Long, long journeys. And I maybe don't remember too much because in the second bus, so the first one was fine, that journey. But the second bus, I was getting a bit of altitude problems as I was going towards northern Chile. And I think I was just concentrating on not being sick, I think was probably the main thing. But I do remember that the saving grace was the seats, comfy, lots of leg room, very wide because I'm quite a big chap. So that was a saving grace compared to what we've experienced in other countries before that. But yeah, I would recommend buses all the way. And they're pretty safe and affordable, I think, compared to maybe flying. Because Patagonia, you mentioned, I was going to come to after the article, but I mentioned now that the expense it is one of the most expensive areas in that region, right? I think is known as anyway.
Yeah, yeah. So traveling in Patagonia, transport, accommodation, food, airfares, all cost more within Patagonia than they do elsewhere in Argentina and in most parts of Chile.
Mm.
Obviously, places like Easter Island accepted. But yeah, and as soon as you get to the region, you realize why. It's just because the distances are huge. A lot of the food has to be brought in. There's various other costs as well that add to it. You can definitely still do it on a budget. The very first time I visited, I was very much backpacking and I was doing it on a tight budget. So you can visit it. You just need a little bit more time.
Mm.
But yeah, it's important to when you're working out your budget for your trip to Argentina, for example, to leave enough to do it justice, and that obviously includes any tours that you might do, national
Mm.
park entrance fees, and so on.
Thanks for listening and or watching today's episode. If you like the episode and the podcast, please give me a subscribe and a follow. You can also rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify if you're from there too. This really helps the podcast. And the best thing for the podcast is word of mouth. If you enjoyed today's episode or any other episodes that you might have listened to or watched, please tell your mates, tell your friends, get them on board, and let's wing it around the world and get to see and hear about the beautiful places that we can travel to. Thank you. Okay, and I want to touch on your article. It's called The Journey to the End of the World. And this looked incredible because you're riding the railway to the end of the world. Now, what is this railway? My question is, I guess that's going to be expensive as well, maybe potentially, but my mind is it's idyllic. Like you mentioned the ferry when you go across those fjords and that stuff. I can imagine the railway just hugging a coastline or hugging these areas. Like it does sound pretty incredible. Maybe a bit like the one in Canada. I always imagine it's super expensive going across, go via the Rockies, right? I can imagine something like that.
Yeah, I mean, many people that will know of. There's a very famous travel book that ends in Patagonia called The Old Patagonia Express by Paul Theroux, where he, many years ago he traveled virtually by train or by train virtually all the way down the Americas and to South America. Sadly, now the train system in both Chile and in Argentina is much curtailed.
Right.
But in Argentine Tierra del Fuego, near Ushuaia, you can take a short ride on the southernmost railway on Earth, which is the Tren del Mundo, which is the end of the world train,
Okay.
essentially. And that has a really, it's an interesting train ride. It's like a steam train.
Okay.
And it runs from just outside Ushuaia to Tierra del Fuego National Park, where it's another great place to go hiking. It's also great for bird watching and that kind of thing. So it's very much a tourist train, but it has a fascinating history. And it really kind of, if you want to get a bit of an insight into Tierra del Fuego as a whole and Ushuaia in particular, it's a really interesting train to ride. When the Argentine government colonized Tierra del Fuego, a brutal process that had, a terrible impact on the indigenous communities that lived there. This took place in the end of the 19th, start of the 20th century. And one of the things the Argentine government did to try and cement its control over a section of the region, was to found a penal colony. So Ushuaia it became a penal colony, a brutal penal colony, often used for political prisoners. It was known as the Siberia of the South.
Right.
Today, the former prison is a museum that tells you all of this history and allows you to walk into the old cells and stuff. It's a fascinating thing to place to visit. But once the penal colony was founded, the rest of the town started to grow around it and the
Hmm.
economy started to develop. And they decided that they needed a train route to bring in timber from the surrounding forests. And the convicts, the prisoners, obviously provided some free labor to get this job done. So the end of the world train was built by convict labor, in brutal conditions often, but as some of the testimony in the museum makes clear, a lot of the prisoners were just pleased to be out of those terrible cells,
Imagine.
even
Yeah.
if it was doing kind of this backbreaking labor. A few of them tried to escape, inevitably. I'm not sure how many made it away. But anyway, that's why this train line was built. But then eventually, it kind of around the middle of the 20th century, it fell out of use. And then it was relatively recently restored. Over the last few decades, it's been restored and turned into something of a tourist attraction. So today it's kind of kitsch, and you use it, it's not the most direct way to get from A to B, and it's pricier than other train journeys that you might take in Argentina. But it takes you through a beautiful, some beautiful scenery. It takes you through peat bogs and mountains up to the forests of the national park, and and you get a bit of an insight into how present day Tierra del Fuego came to be.
So interesting. There's a lot of these railways across the world, isn't there, where they're kind of been built for previous times, left a little bit, and then brought back to life, probably for tourism reasons, which is great. But who doesn't love a train? I mean, some of the train rides I think I've been on are probably a bit underrated. Like there's the one in India, right? I think it's potentially the highest one in the world. I think it's by Gum and near Darjeeling. It's a bit of a toy train, it's a bit of a tourist train, but it's amazing it weaves through the mountains, right? And
Yeah.
then obviously in the same continent as Argentina, in Cusco, you can get the train back from Machu Picchu, which is obviously a purposely built tourist train, but it goes really slow. But when it weaves through the mountains, I mean, you can't beat it, can you? I know it's going to be a little bit more expensive, maybe, and just a tourist thing, but the way you just weave in and out of these landscapes, I don't think you can really beat a good train ride.
Oh no, absolutely. It's a it's a cliche, but it's a glorious
It
way
is.
to travel. Yeah, and it's I definitely, if you've made it that far south, you've
Mm,
made it to the tip of the continent. You're closer to Antarctica than you are to Buenos Aires at that point. You know,
that's
you,
crazy, isn't it?
you will have had a bit of expense. You may as well, it's definitely spending a couple of hours riding the train at the end of the world.
Why not? And have you ever tried to go to Antarctica? Just briefly while we're in Ushuaia.
Yeah, yeah, I went to Antarctica,
Oh, you
yeah,
have.
a few years ago before the pandemic. Most Ushuaia today is, from a tourist point of view, is really known as the main Antarctic
Mm,
main port for ships to buy into Antarctica. And yeah, they sail down the Beagle Channel and across the Drake Passage, one of the most roughest patches of water on Earth, and then they get down to the Antarctic Peninsula. When I did it, I was lucky in that I did a slightly longer trip. So I left Puerto Madryn, which is, as mentioned before, the gateway to Welsh Patagonia and also near
mm,
this incredible marine reserve. And I sailed from there over to the Falkland Islands, which was a couple of days, and
oh,
spent some time there, and then
yeah.
went south another couple of days to South Georgia, which is an absolutely remarkable place. Yeah, absolutely stunning
Mm,
landscapes, hundreds of thousands of penguins, for example, as well as whales and sea elephant seals and fur seals. And from there, went down to the Antarctic Peninsula, and then finally came back at the end of the 3 weeks to Ushuaia. So
it's
an
a great
awful lot of
trip.
people, most people going to Antarctica will depart from Ushuaia. Obviously, that's difficult to do on a budget, if not impossible to do on a budget. The only potential tip that I offer for that is that if you've got time to play with, if you're in Ushuaia, particularly towards the end of the cruise season, so kind of February time, roughly,
Yeah.
lots of the tourist travel agencies there will advertise last minute space or last minute berths on any of the ships that still have space. So this is not cheap, but it can be, potentially
Cheaper.
it can be a lot cheaper. So, it can reduce your cost by thousands of dollars. You have to take your chance. You have to be able to hang around in a fire for a little bit. Yeah, it is possible. And yeah, I mean, Antarctica, I mean, we can do another show on Antarctica, I'm sure. But yeah,
I'm sure, yeah.
an incredible place.
Yeah, I think you always hear the myth in Ushuaia that you can jump on a cargo ship, right? Or something like that. for free, but I haven't really heard many people say they've been successful at that. But I think you
Yeah, I
can't really
mean,
avoid the cost of going normally, and rightly so, because obviously it's a protected area. So you're going to have to deal with the cost, and then obviously you're going to have to deal with the rough sea. So if you're struggling from seasickness, like my partner is, kind of rules it out unless you're going to fly there by helicopter or plane. I don't know if that's possible if you're not a scientist. And then, yeah, I guess that if you're in Ushuaia and you can hang around for months, maybe you might get lucky in this cargo ship thing, but I'm not sure it's possible.
yeah, I mean, on the rough seas, I would definitely say that, I don't normally get seasick, have good sea legs.
Yeah.
The Drake Passage is rough. So yeah, it's be prepared,
Okay.
I would say. It is worth it, but nevertheless, it's worth being forewarned is forearmed.
Okay. Great tip about the last minute deals though. I know let's go legit here a little bit. Yeah, that's obviously going to help if you've got time, right? If you can hang around and get one of those last spots and take a couple of $1,000s or pounds off because it is expensive, isn't it? As a cost alone, it's not going to be a backpacking trip, that's for sure. Okay, and I've got next couple of notes before we get to another area in Argentina we're going to talk about before we come to the end. We sort of talked on some like tips here for people traveling for the first time. Like if you're a first time in Patagonia, I guess independent travel is fine, but do people normally go on tours? Because obviously it's such a vast area and you might have a bit of a short time window. I guess you want to see the best bits if you like. So I can imagine it'd be quite intimidating trying to plan a trip there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a great evangelist for independent travel, and I would say, and I'd always encourage people to do so. I mean, if you're short on time, obviously organized tours can help, or if you have particular needs or whatever,
Yeah.
then there's lots of really good organized tours. But it's somewhere that that even though it might seem intimidating on the surface, you certainly can travel independently just with a little bit of forward planning. As I say, the public transport net, you can get to lots and lots of remote places on the public transport network. Booking, organizing bus tickets and things is is easy to do and
Hmm.
relatively cost effective. The same if you're flying as well. It's easy to book accommodation and stuff, and tours and things. A lot of these places, however far away they are from, the capitals of their respective countries, they're online. You can book them through popular online booking platforms, for example,
Yeah.
although even better, book directly. You definitely can do it independently, even if it's your first
Okay.
time. A bit of Spanish obviously helps. English is obviously quite widely spoken, particularly in the touristy areas. But yeah, just do a bit of forward planning, take into account the distances, give yourself a bit of flexibility because delays are not uncommon, particularly if you're traveling during the kind of later in the autumn and in the winter. So build some flexibility into it and don't try and do too much as well. There's so many places to go and see. You want to try and pack it all in, but it's better just to focus on you know if you're there for 2 weeks, focus on like three areas and try and do them, really, really well and just result, appreciate that you're just going to have to come back and visit the rest of it another time. But you can definitely do it independently. The first time I visited was my first time in South America, and
Oh wow.
my Spanish was not good at all. But yeah, it was very there's lots of good information around. Obviously, I'm biased as a co-author of The Lonely Planet to Chile, but there's information there that can help you plan your independent trip, basically.
Yeah, I think this podcast does promote independent trips. I don't mind tours for certain places, but for example, I've never been. So if I was to go, obviously get into one of the big cities, I would Chile or Argentina, make my way down by bus, and then figure out from there. I think that's the way I would do it. I'm very different to obviously some people who want to have that sort of planned structure, which is fine. But yeah, I think the Argentinians and the Chileans, that the way they've done their tourism, I think is pretty easy to get around. I don't think it's too difficult. And also, if you've got a smartphone, you probably just get a local SIM, and as long as you've got internet, I don't think you could go too wrong really of finding out information. Do you have any plans to go back before we get to another area of Argentina?
Well, yeah, I mean, always. I mean, I think the first time
It's always
first
on the
time I went to
calendar, is it?
Patagonia, I left something of me there, and
Yeah.
it kind of it always draws me back. So I don't have anything fixed in the dive for this year, but despite visiting Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego for the best part of 20 years, there's loads of places that I still want to sea.
Mm,
So yeah, so hopefully I will be back there before too long.
got it. Okay. Another place in Argentina, which admittedly was never on my radar. I don't think it's on a lot of people's radars in Argentina because obviously they go to classics. You mentioned Patagonia, Buenos Aires, of course, as well, is Cordoba. So Cordoba, which is a different area of Argentina I don't know much about. And can you explain where it is and what it's known for? And you wrote an article about this place, but I believe you're going back.
Yeah, absolutely. So Cordoba is Argentina's second,
Okay.
and it's essentially it's west inland from Buenos Aires towards the Andes, and it's kind of broadly speaking in the geographic center of Argentina, and it's kind of very close to the biggest mountain range in Argentina outside of the Andes. And yeah, Cordoba is is a beautiful city. I mean, it's got a lot of history. Some of the architecture is stunning. It's very famous for its university. It's very old, well-established university. So it kind of got a student, youthful feel to it. It's very politically engaged as well.
Mhm.
And the surrounding region has always been popular with Argentine travelers. But for whatever reason, it just hasn't drawn many number of foreign tourists, that I would say that it deserves, or that other areas of the country do so. I mean, so I'd say it's definitely underrated. Apart from the city itself, which is really interesting, there's some great restaurants, there's some really, you know, it's interesting from a cultural point of view. Nice places to stay. You've got the the Sierras region, so the
Mhm.
beautiful hills which are dotted with estancias, so these cattle ranches, essentially many of which are open to visitors, and some of them offer, some of the best horse riding you can imagine. I'll give a shout out to Estancia Potreros, which is one of my favorite places to stay. You go horse riding on these wonderful Peruvian Paso horses, and the
Mhm.
landscape, it often feels to me a bit like the Highlands of Scotland, really. It's kind of
Oh,
like
wow.
moorland and that kind of, it's stunning scenery. But then you've got lots of, the area is dotted with little interesting, quirky places. It attracts like a lot of new age travelers, for example. There's a lot
Okay.
of supposed psychic energy in some spots.
Got it.
It's many people consider it to be a hotspot for UFO sightings, for example. There's a very interesting town there called Villa General Belgrano, which is a very Germanic town.
Okay.
Another place with a really interesting history, and they have kind of quite kitsch Germanic style architecture. They have an Oktoberfest. You can go there and get a Black Forest gatto and hearty Germanic food if you want. There's fascinating places for, it's good for wildlife. There's, particularly bird life.
Mhm.
They've got one of the biggest salt lakes. I think the biggest salt lake in South America
Oh,
nearby, recently been turned into a national park. Very
yeah.
good for bird life, particularly flamingos.
Mhm.
But you see condors and so on elsewhere. The area is also dotted with these old Jesuit estancias and churches that were founded, many centuries ago during the Spanish colonization of the region. And then and there's lots and lots of, it's a quirky place. You can go and visit the the childhood home of Che Guevara, for
Okay.
example,
Yeah.
whose family took him from Buenos Aires there to help get over his asthma in the clean airs of the hills of Cordoba province. So there's lots of, it's an interesting place, and there's, it's good for walking and things like paragliding and so on. And yeah, so if you want to see a different side to
Mhm.
Argentina, particularly if you traveled in Argentina a bit before and you haven't been to that region, yeah, it's well worth getting onto it.
And you're going back. So what's the assignment this time?
So I have an interesting trip coming up actually just next month, and that will be to write about some of the issues that I've discussed with you, but to kind of focus on the new national park, which covers this huge salt lake, a little sea as it's called
Mhm.
over there. And so some really interesting work with kind of conservation going on there, and also it's a place that sustainable tourism is in its infancy. So I'm going to go and check it out, and hopefully come back with some interesting stories.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. Yeah, talk about Argentina here, like the different areas. I mean, it's an amazing country, in it. I mean, it's hard to think of such a diverse place that's that big from north to south, east to west. It really is, as a whole. If you spent like, I don't know what the the tourist visa length is, I don't know, if it's 90 days or 180 days, whatever it is, you could spend all of that time just touching the surface, can't you? It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I lived in Buenos Aires for the best part of a year,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
I've traveled there for pleasure. I traveled around Argentina for pleasure, and I've traveled there for guidebooks, for countless travel articles over the
Mm.
years, and I still feel like I scratched the surface because there is so much.
God.
There's so much to see. It's a huge place. I mean, I know I keep emphasizing that, but it really, the scale of it, particularly from a British point of view, is staggering. And yeah, but that's also, it's really rewarding in that sense too, because you can always get away from the crowds and see something you hadn't expected.
And Buenos Aires must be a nice base to be in, right? I probably think it's another episode, but I imagine it's just a place to live and chill out and drink some coffee and maybe do some partying, whatever. I can imagine that'd be a bit of an awesome place to be for a while.
Yeah, I mean it's a great city. It's got very much its own vibe. It's got lots and lots of character. Yeah, if you just want to sit on the in a cafe and drink coffee and read a book, if you want to go partying, if you want to do all manner of things, it's really really interesting city, and I loved it from my first visit 20 years ago. It was great living there. Um, yeah, for as I say, for the best part of the year, and I'm so excited to be going back next month as well. The first time I would have been there since before the pandemic. So excited to see some friends and also to see, it's a very dynamic place. And Argentina is going through a turbulent period at the moment. I
Yeah.
think that's probably putting it mildly with its new government. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm interested
Mm.
to see it on lots of levels.
You kind of answered my next question, really, was going to be, so you've not been there since the World Cup win. So I'd be intrigued to see what the fever's like there. It's a huge thing for them. Obviously, Messi scoring all those goals, and the final was one of the best, which was like, I would say, one of the best highs that country could get because I love their football. And then you've got this juxtaposition where you're now going to find out they've got this president coming in who seems a bit nuts. So it's going to be interesting, the vibe of how that kind of balances out a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a cliche to say it, but I mean, football is such a huge, is a central part of, in South America as a whole, but I'd say
Yeah.
particularly in someone like Argentina and Brazil, of course. And yeah, I mean, you just had to see the footage of Porteños, people from Buenos Aires celebrating the World Cup win, in the center. I mean, for days and days. Yeah, it was a huge thing. You really can't. If you think it would be a big deal, England winning the World Cup, yeah, you need to get to Argentina to see the impact. Yeah, and more recent political history is turbulent. There's a lot of protests at the moment.
Mm,
It's a very right-wing government at the
yeah.
moment. The president is pretty nutty, I think, to borrow your words for it.
You say my word, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a fractious time, but yeah, so I'm going to be interested to see what's happening. But there's still whatever's going on when you're in Buenos Aires, it still grabs you, and some neighborhoods transport you back in time, some are
Mm.
hyper modern, you know some some places it's some places you just share the same rhythm, I think, and Buenos Aires is certainly that for me.
Yeah, I don't think you really know the real problems if you don't live there. I mean, as a tourist, you might hear about them, you might chat to some of your friends in the cafe, but then you leave, I guess, 2, 3, 4 weeks later, and that's it, right? But people who live there, they're the ones protesting, so it shouldn't affect the tourism, I'd imagine. I imagine if you're in Patagonia, you're a world away from anywhere. So I can imagine it just feels like a place in itself, and just to get away and not even think about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I should say, I mean, obviously it's a turbulent time within the domestic politics, but it's certainly not a reason for tourists to be
Oh yeah,
concerned, or,
yeah.
or not to visit. And yeah, I mean, in Patagonia, you're a long way away from Buenos Aires is a long way away. So you can never escape the politics, of course, completely. But it's not something that, seeing protests aside, and there've been strikes and stuff recently. Beyond that, it's not something to be concerned about and to put you off traveling. It's just important context, or useful context, or interesting context for you
Mm.
to have, and particularly if you want to have a bit more of an insight into, you know what Argentina is like and what it's like today and what the future might hold.
Okay, I'm going to do 1 minute, just quick fire Argentina questions. I'm making these up as I go, so I think there's such a big country, so not too hardcore. Um, we'll kick off with what was your favorite Argentinian dish or snack?
Well, I go with, I mean, obviously, steak would be the
Okay.
easy and obvious option, or empanadas, but I'd say ice cream. Really, the ice cream in Argentina is
Oh,
fantastic. There's an ice cream parlor on almost every street in Buenos Aires, and it's excellent. So I'll go for that. Passion fruit ice cream or dulce de leche ice cream.
okay. And maybe one or two places that you haven't been to that maybe if you can go tomorrow and there's like no rules, you can go anywhere in Argentina, where you're going to go?
Yeah, interesting. I would go to the north, the northeast. So kind of near Iguazu up towards the Paraguayan border. That's somewhere that I've only kind of skimmed through
Mm.
in the past, but I would really like to go. There look like some fantastic national parks there, some really interesting towns.
It's a weird border. You can just literally walk through to Paraguay. There's no border crossing. It's a bit weird. I don't know if that's legal or not. Don't know. I did that and bought some sunglasses, but I don't know if that's technically traveling in a different country. What about like a drink? Do you have a favorite Argentine drink? Could be alcoholic or non-alcoholic.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the wine is excellent. The Malbec is excellent. I mean, on a summer day, a glass of Torrontés or one of the white wine grapes there is excellent. So yeah, that's what I'd go for.
Okay, and maybe outside of Buenos Aires, three cities that people must visit.
Okay, well, I mean, definitely Salta, which I know you visited.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely glorious city in the northwest of the country.
Mm.
Definitely Cordoba as well. Really interesting place. Yeah, I mean Ushuaia, which is yeah, if you can get down there, yeah, you'll have a fantastic time.
Okay, that'd be my questions for Argentina. Where can people find you? Just remind people. I know people probably listened to you before on the podcast, but maybe tell listeners where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find online. So if you just search my name, you can find my website, shafikmeghji.com, and on all the social media platforms you can think of, I'm at Shafik Meghji. So yeah, if you go to my website, you can see all my latest articles and books and podcast appearances and what I'm up to.
Cool. I'll whack those links in the show notes. My final question for the podcast is what's coming up for 2024? Obviously, you've got Cordoba coming up. Is there anything you can say to be leisure or for work that's coming up for the year?
Yeah, so I mean, on the for the Cordoba trip, I'll also be going to Buenos Aires, and I'll also be going to across the River Plate into Uruguay, because I'll
Oh,
be
lovely.
writing a piece
Huh.
on Montevideo.
That's a
Um,
country that fascinates me. I've never been on my list. Just seems a quite unique country amongst the whole big ones in there that people talk about.
yeah, I mean, it's I mean, I've been quite a few times. It's so easy to get to from Buenos Aires. It's just an hour or so across
Oh,
the
wow.
River Plate. Yeah, and Montevideo is kind of almost like a small version of Buenos Aires. But yeah, really, really interesting, very culturally rich. Football, of course, is a huge thing. But yeah, it's and again an underrated place. It doesn't get as many foreign visitors or certainly like European visitors as it should. So hopefully my article will help to put that right.
Okay. And anywhere else in the world or Europe?
Those are the only two confirmed
Oh,
trips
okay.
at this
Yeah.
point. So I've kind of got
Yeah.
a few irons in the fire for later in the year, but those are the only two ones confirmed. But yeah, definitely a holiday in Europe at some point later in the year as well. Yeah, hopefully traveling by train as well to touch on something we
Oh, yeah. Okay.
talked on before because yeah, it's obviously as soon as you get the Eurostar over to France or Belgium, then the continent starts to open up, and yeah, trying to reduce the amount of flying that I'm doing, and there's some
Mm.
wonderful train routes, and there's loads of great new sleeper train routes that are opening up across Europe as well. So trying to take advantage of those trips will be yeah, definitely on my agenda.
Yeah, I think I was doing my YouTube video series for our Interrail trip last year. And I was thinking, God, that's great traveling by train. I know we talked about this already, but the way you can just jump on a train and they're normally quite reliable in Europe, apart from the UK. It's a different story. But once you get into Europe and let's say you got Interrail pass for a month and you can sort of just make your way east, so many options. Like it has to be
Yeah,
one of the best ways to travel Europe, if not the best.
absolutely. I mean, funnily enough, I'm currently reading the book, a new travel book that follows the route broadly of the Orient Express, but uses interrail passes to get there and back to London.
Mm.
And it's an interesting book, and it's certainly one that's kind of, firing up my desire to visit visit lots of these places. And as you say, it's a wonderful way to travel around Europe. The interrail pass is one of the great travel
Yeah.
developments, I'd say, over the last 50 years or so. And yeah, obviously, and not just is it better from an environmental point of view, it's just, it's a more enjoyable way to travel.
Yeah, and if you just to finish on this train travel, it's not a train travel episode, bit of loving here for the trains. But if you go like east to Asia, we're in this like different world of train travel where so Europe have got like fairly good trains, and you got this like supernatural 500 km/h trains that go through Japan or China, right? It's a completely different way. So I'm thinking, oh, I just want to go to China. Obviously, travel the country, it's huge. Want to see some of the culture and just travel by train. I just want to see what is that like for like 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's, in lots of parts of Asia. I mean, lots of my own experience is in India, and obviously trains are, the way to travel
Yeah.
round India. But yeah, I mean, I haven't done that in China. I would love to do that in China. I've done that a bit in Japan. Trains are on another level, and yeah, I mean, it seems like in lots of parts of China that's the case too. So yeah, I hope you make it out there soon.
Well, yeah, we'll see, won't we? Yeah. Okay. Shafik, thanks for coming on to the podcast and have a great chat. I think we'll probably get a third one in. I imagine late this year, early next year. Let's see what comes up for that one. I think there's loads to talk about, but I appreciate you coming back on to make time and talk about an amazing part of the world, which is Patagonia.
Well, my absolute pleasure. Thanks for inviting me back, James. Always a pleasure to chat to you, and yeah, look forward to the hat trick later in the year.
Yeah, cheers, dude. Thank you. If you'd like to follow my travels, you can always subscribe to this channel. But I am active on Instagram as Winging It Travel Podcast. You can search me on there. I do the odd TikTok as well. Not amazing on there, but you can follow me there too. I do upload the odd short for this channel on YouTube. And most of all, if you want to get in contact, email me at jameshammondtravel@gmail.com. If you have any questions about any of the topics we've discussed on this podcast or today's episode, you can get in contact with me on email by emailing me at jameshammondtravel@gmail.com. And I do respond back to all the people who email me there. And finally, please let me know how this episode has gone. What would you like to hear more of? Which section is your favorite? Any countries you want to discuss? Any type of guests you want on? Any particular guests you want to come on? Get in contact, let me know, send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks.